Hello, and welcome to my TED Talk. Today's subject, a history of leadership, a look through the past 80 years of leadership theory. Now, in order to break this down, what we first have to do is ask ourselves one simple question. What is leadership? Leadership is the ability to influence and move a team. Now, this means not just being able to move a team, and get them doing something or anything else, but to move them in a specific direction that makes them the key ingredient to the success of any organization. Now, what I mean by this is leaders have to be able to motivate, to keep a team pushing towards a specific goal that the entire company, the team, whoever has in mind. Now, through this, a leader isn't necessarily just one person. It can be a team of leaders. It can be, two people. It can be however many. But leadership is these people, this one to many people that are influencing their team towards this end goal. Now, leadership, they have to have vision, strategy, and innovation. What this means is the leader has to see the big picture. They have to see that end goal before the team. They have to be able to see where the goal is, what obstacles are going to come up in between now and then, and be able to strategize and move around or to either avoid or solve these problems before or as they occur. This often calls for them to be very innovative. They often have to think of solutions that may not have existed before. They have to come up with new strategies and new ways to motivate their team. And looking at this, there are a lot of theories that have risen up through the ages. And again, while we are only talking about the last 80 years or so, it is very important to know that there were prior theories, but however, all of these prior theories relied very much on the person being born as a natural leader. This talked about them being born strong, being born into nobility, being born with all of these have specific bloodlines that very much so affected their genes and made them the quality candidate for leadership. Once we hit into the 1940s, that began to change as we realized that behavioral leadership was a thing. This relied on leadership as a learned behavior rather than the trait you were given at birth. It led to approaches to training best known as Blake and Moten's managerial grid, which you can see to the left over here. Now, the thing about this grid is if you look at the way it's set up, you see the concern for people on one axis and the concern for productivity on the other. Each mark on these definitely has their place. Now, if you look at the two extremes, we'll start down here at the red X with the authority obedience leadership. If you notice right here, this looks more like a manufacturing facility. With this in mind, this necessarily isn't the greatest example because there are other things that fit into this, but this focused very much so on the high concern for productivity and getting as much manufacturing done as possible in as little time as possible. You weren't so much focused on asking your employees, how are you feeling today? Are you loving your job? That wasn't your concern. Your concern was, hey, what are my numbers like today? On the opposite end of that spectrum, if you're a leader and you're running a country club, there's no productivity to be concerned with. You're concerned with, are my country club members having a good time? Are they relaxed? Are they is there something wrong? Is there something that needs to be fixed that is causing my employees grief? Now, what we primarily try to aim for in a lot of areas, especially nowadays, is going to be these two right here, the team leadership and organizational management. The reason for this is because this balances the concern for people with the concern for productivity. Now, we'll touch back on this a little bit later, but for right now, let's go ahead and move forward and start looking into the 1960s, which is where we started realizing that the situation could dictate more of what type of leader is where. Now, this recognized the importance of environmental influence on the leader-follower systems. This basically meaning that this specific situation requires this specific type of leader and this specific type of person. The issue that situational leadership had is that it still believed that leaders have fixed behaviors and should be placed into their match style. The biggest example that I can use of this is looking at if you have two separate leaders, one being a a military drill sergeant, and the other being a motivational speaker. You're not going to send that motivational speaker to rally the troops or, train the cadets that have just been enlisted. Likewise, you're not going to send that military boot camp sergeant to talk, to give a motivational TED talk to a group of high schoolers. Either one of those, if you don't put them in their proper space, it's not going to end well. The drill sergeant very well could motivate the kids, but he's probably going to make most of them cry. Now, the reason why this failed once again is because it still believed that leaders had these fixed behaviors to be placed there. I personally have met a former drill sergeant who is now a motivational speaker and is fantastic at it. He actually gives therapeutic talks to people that have been through different trauma situations, PTSD, and he also rallies behind students of all different types, whether they're wanting to enlist or not, and he pushes them to reach towards their goals. He doesn't do so in more like a drill sergeant style, like you would expect, but the first time you meet him, you would have never known that he was a drill sergeant. So this is where this situational leadership, it still has its place. That yes, if there ever was a need for a drill sergeant, that former drill sergeant could probably be thrown back in and still have that ability to kind of switch that mentality in his brain and be able to jump back into his drill sergeant mode. Now, looking forward a little bit further, we jump into the trans theories. Transformational leaders encourage, inspire, and motivate their followers and are used when companies need to change structure or take a new direction. What this means is these leaders take the new employees and they build them. They're transformed to meet these companies' needs. This means that they, regardless of whether they had experience before or not, the training that they had previously might not be what the company needs now, and the same goes for the veteran and seasoned employees that they already have. Say you have an employee that you brought them up and you've raised them up to here, and then suddenly the company needs to change direction. You need to be able to transform even the most seasoned employees into what the company is transforming into itself and take that new direction into what the company needs. On the other end of that spectrum is the transactional leaders, which rely very heavily on authority. This goes back to what we were talking about in Moten's graph, or Moten's chart, right here. This authority obedience leadership is very much a transactional leadership. This basically tells you that there's a reward and consequence for everything that you do. It's still used very much to reinforce the status quo, mostly in matured companies. Now, the thing with both of these is they have their place. Transactional leadership doesn't do well in early startups or growing businesses, particularly because of one thing. Um, in a matured company, like say it's a chain retail store, if you go tell an employee to do something and they don't get it done, then you just say, okay, well, here you go, you're fired. You go get that done, or the same will happen to you. Consequence. And then when they do get it done and they exceed your expectations, you give them a raise. It's or a bonus or more hours, something. Reward and consequence. And very much relied on this was the consequence, you saw it happen. However, in startups and growing businesses, you can't rely on that because the consequence will always be greater for the leader. If you're in a startup and something doesn't get done to meet a deadline, you can't just get rid of that employee because, well, now you're not going to be able to hire another employee. You don't have any other employees. Now you're back to square one. You have to do that all yourself, and you don't have the time for that in a growing business. So the transformational leadership, which relies on really building the relations that you have with your employees, is more geared towards growing companies and early startups. Now, next we're going to jump about 20 years ahead and go into new leadership starting in the 1990s. Now, the reason for this huge gap, the 1 decade gap in the 80s, was because this gave us time to really dig in and get the research on all of these different leadership theories that we've had so far and what we were still missing. And through that, we realized that leadership is more complex than previous theories suggested. The great man theory believed that you were either born it or you weren't. The behavioral theory, you were either born to be trained to be one or you weren't. Situational leadership, you either had the ability to be trained into this situation or you had the ability to be trained into that situation. It was very much so this or that on all of these. However, we began realizing that leadership is so much more complex and focuses not just on the interactions between leaders and followers, leaders in the situations, the followers in the situations. It's the whole thing, the system as a whole. It's focused on the interactions between the leaders, followers, the situation, and just the whole system working together to realize what the company needs. These new theories support rapidly changing technological environments, which is where we see a lot of today. In the 1990s, we saw the true birth of the internet and the technological bang. Essentially it was a big bang, technologically speaking, and because of that, we've seen the birth of AI, we've seen the birth of robotics, and just so many different areas of career have all just changed so rapidly in such a short amount of time. We've needed new theories to kind of take into effect and put kind of all of these other theories either aside or melded together. And in looking at those, talking a little bit more about these new leaderships, this is something that we've definitely seen a lot of in these past couple of years during the pandemic, where situations have changed so rapidly. We've gone from total lockdowns to certain businesses being able to open, to most businesses only being remote, to some businesses are slowly starting to incorporate back into the office. However, a lot of things are still very much remote. Now, the thing with that is that focuses very highly on this situational leadership. However, with one primary factor. Looking back at Moten's chart, Moten's grid, you still want the productivity, but now you have situations where you do have to be concerned for your people as well. Just because there's the risk of sickness, their situations have fully changed to where some of them are now stuck at home with their kids, with their families, their pets. They have home life mixed with their work life, so that creates this imbalance that now you have to be able to shift your balance into either these team leadership or organization management roles, so that you can focus on still trying to be as productive as possible while also taking into account the concern for your staff. Now, jumping back to our new leadership, and we'll continue on. This brings in new theories that have kind of begun to rise more so in recent times. Service leadership focuses on how the leader can support their team and realizes the importance of the followers and serving others first. Now, this is a leadership style that really has to be handled with care, specifically for the reason of, you can be too pushy with your service. There are times when there are certain followers who they don't need that. They're a little more independent. They just need you to tell them, hey, this is what I need done, or hey, this is how you do this, and then you just let them do their thing, and you kind of step back and you watch and see how they do it. It's not always about jumping in and saying, hey, how is your day going? How are you feeling about this? Is there anything I can help you with? It's very good to want to be there to help your team, and that very much pulls into the transformational leadership. The problem is you can get so pushy with your service that you start making the employee themselves wonder why they are even there if you're going to be in there doing it for them anyways. And also, this can lead to an imbalance of you getting behind on the work that you're supposed to be doing because you're too focused on providing for your team. Now, inclusive leadership focuses on a person-centered approach, which is used to empower followers to become leaders themselves. Now, this one very much so takes into effect these transformational theory, where you're transforming these quality employees into leaders that the company needs. Now, the biggest issue with this is you have to be very careful, because this one also puts you very much so right here between situations 3 and 4, where you can very easily go from the supporting role to giving a little bit too much power to the employees and ending up in a situation that could potentially cause problems. The other thing about inclusive leadership is it also sometimes can lean a little bit more biased towards that very early one that we talked about in behavioral leadership. It can very easily create kind of a bias in the workplace where you see these behavioral traits and you immediately assume that this person is a quality candidate and you jump at the chance to bring them in. Not only does that create a kind of mistrust with other employees that are potentially wanting that role, but it also creates a little bit of a high stakes pressure for the candidate that you've now chosen, due to the fact that they may or may not want that role. So inclusive leadership, again, it's one that has to be handled with care, and it has to be in the right situation. Situational leadership leads very heavily into a lot of these, just with the minor fact that they missed, that it's not just one or the other. Authentic leadership focuses on the authenticity of the leader. These leaders and followers focus more on positive traits and less on negatives, and they treat followers with respect and reliability. Now, what this is focused on is the leader themselves being able to be honest about mistakes, being able to build the trust system with their employees. Again, going back to the service leadership, you can be there and offer your service to your team whenever they need it, and that's going to build that trust that they have for you. Likewise, you have to be able to authentically provide the vision of the company. You have to be able to direct them in an honest way and be kind of self-aware. Like what authentic leadership focuses on is the fact that even leaders are still people. We're all still human. Leaders can still make mistakes, and leaders can have bad days and things like that. Leaders are not supposed to be perfect, like previous theories have suggested. And this relies very heavily on being able to show your employees that you see them as people just as they should see you as a person. Once we get into, AIs and robotics having more control over how companies are run and everything else, that's going to get into a much more tricky situation. But that's a whole nother topic altogether. Now, in looking into these theories, I do have a few references that I can highly recommend to you guys. The BMJ Leader, the Journal of Arts and Humanities, has a great one over the past, present, and future of leadership. And then leadership theories within the Leadership Central. Leadership Central is an excellent website that has tons of different resources and guides and training systems, just so many things for anyone to be able to go on there and reference. So I highly recommend you all go on there and take a look at that. And I thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. Hope you really enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out or leave them below. Thank you.